What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 641. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how's the draft going?
Excellently.
The freaking MTGO put out one of Luis's absolute most favorite sets, and I can't pull him away from the computer.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll
Maybe
have
I don't
you know
want to
that
pull you away.
I had a busy week, and I have done actually far fewer IPA drafts than you might have expected. I'm showing what I consider great restraint.
By drafting right now while we're trying to do the podcast.
I stopped. My draft finished.
Wow. That is great restraint. How's everything else going?
Drafting during the preamble, I think that is completely acceptable. Sierkovitz, running the numbers. Oh, wait, did I spoil it? And me, you, and Jeff talking about utter nonsense as we do. And at the end of it, well, we end up in a good place.
That's right. And that's where we're at. We're in a good place. We're on LR 641. Big value episode here. 6 for 1, Luis. Are there 6 for 1s? Can we get a 6 for 1?
I mean, Hex is the classic 4/black from Ravnica and destroys 6 target creatures. Not up to 6. 6.
Oh. So it is a 6 for 1, no matter what, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's a 5 for 2. You have to kill your own creature or whatever.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this episode will be big value. As Luis alluded to, this is the time when we bring on our friend Sierkovitz from 17Lands to talk about the data. This time for Neon Dynasty. And so we're going to be going over some interesting data from 17Lands, diving deep and even answering a few questions for Sierkovitz. So first, let's bring him on. Sierko, it's great to see you. How you doing?
Oh, it's great. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure. I'm a bit surprised. I was prepared to talk about IPA data, but okay, we can talk about Kamigawa, no problem.
Oh, I'm sure Luis will come up with a question or two for you about IPA. You know, he's always looking for that edge. And it is interesting, by the way. We'll talk about it probably a little more later, but to look back at the type of mistakes and the types of tendencies that players had when IPA was out, where it was very much Wild West. There was very little content about Limited at all, let alone podcasts like this, or certainly let alone, data deep dives like what you guys over at 17Lands have going on. So I really wonder, how people who drafted that set when it came out would fare against the more equipped players of the day who have access to so much more information. It's really interesting to think about how much we've evolved over time. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot else with Sierkovitz on this episode of the show. Before we do, let's mention our sponsors, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for anything you need magical. That's, if you need booster packs or a box, if you want to draft with your friend, or if you need singles for your latest deck, you can find it over at the CFB marketplace. It's still just at channelfireball.com. It doesn't change for you on that end, but it does change on the other end where when you search for cards, it actually gets put through a whole marketplace. So multiple stores represented in one spot. And what that means is you get to choose the best. So you can choose the best quality card, as far as condition goes. You can get the vendor with the quickest shipping to you. You can just go for the best price if you don't care, all that kind of stuff. And it lets you decide, and also just gives you a bigger selection on all of those type of things. While you're at Channel Fireball, make sure you check out CFB Pro as well. Look, premium content. There's not that much of it around. If you want the good stuff, CFB Pro has it for you. This is how you can improve your game and get advice and tips and deck guides and even limited content from some of the very best players in the world over at CFB Pro. If you do pick up anything over at Channel Fireball, if you'd be so kind as to use the affiliate code LR at checkout, it lets them know that we sent you and it helps out the show. We really appreciate it. Show's also brought to you by FTX. That's the safe, regulated place to manage your digital assets. If you're in the United States, it's ftx.us. If you're outside, it's ftx.com. This is, emerging technologies. We're also kind of figuring out how these things are going to be fitting into our lives and what role it's going to take. But if you want to check it out, you want to get in early, FTX is the place to go. Now, as with any type of investment, and this is an investment, you have to be careful, right? There's risks that you could take, and you want to make sure that you consult an investment professional before doing an investment of any kind. But when you're ready, when you feel like, okay, I understand what's going on here, I got an idea for what I want to do with it, FTX is the place to go. Make sure you check them out. Again, ftx.us within the US and ftx.com outside. The show's also, of course, brought to you by via our Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. If you sign up, you get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail, no matter what. That's around the world, no matter what level you get. We just really wanted to make sure that if you support us, that you get something cool for it. And you get access to the Patreon question of the week thread, the questions for guests. And if you go up, you can even get the show in its unedited form. You get access to the live recordings, which we're doing right now. Cool part about those, by the way, is that we record them live. They stream live to YouTube on the LR YouTube channel, but it's a private link. So, it's only for people that are on the Patreon that get access to it. But it is still there, and the link is still there. So like if you don't happen to be around at the exact moment that we record it, and you pop up a couple hours later, you can still click the link and watch us record it just on a little bit delayed, and you get the show a little early that way. Though it is the unedited version, but still, you get to hear us talking before and after, and if you are here when we're live, you can chat to us and say hi. We've got our friends Michael and Kelsey in the chat right now, for example. So there you go. Patreon.com/limited resources for that. Let us crack a pack. I like, by the time we have Sierkovitz on, Luis and I usually have settled in pretty well about what we like, what we don't, kind of where we're going. And I love it when we have Sierkovitz here because he gets to kind of guide the ship for us and show us, what he's into and what he likes. So let's do a little crack a pack here. And, obviously I forgot to download it. So let me do that. And then we'll take a look. It looks like our first card out is not visible to me just yet. There it is. First card out is Unstoppable Ogre. That's the 2 in red 401 that makes something not be able to block on the other side. Sirko, where are you at on the Ogre?
Oh, I thought Luis should talk about this card first.
Why?
Unstoppable Ogre? Oh, wait, not a problem.
Too similar.
No, I think that the card is okay, but I mean, definitely not the first pickable card. It's maybe we'll talk about it a bit later, but it's definitely a staple in some of those very heavy or even mono-red decks that are possible in the format. But it's not something you want to first pick. It's something you want to get late because maybe in your pod red is underdrafted and then you can pounce on that archetype. Yeah.
Would you prefer not to be in red to kick things off personally?
I think me personally, yes. I know some people are hard forcing red and having good results with it, but I'm maybe too chickeny. Or maybe too much impacted by the wisdom of Ben Stark, and I tried to do the hard way. But I think that it's a risky strategy to pounce on red if someone else is going to do that as well. You're stuck in a color that doesn't pair very well with anything else. So that's the problem that you might run into. So I'd rather have signals for that somewhere later in the first pack. And maybe, dip my toe if I see like a busted rare in the color.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Network Terminal is next.
Oh, that's my love of this. This is what Seize the Storm was for me in Midnight Hunt. Network
okay.
Terminal is for me in this. I love this card so much because it does everything, basically. So I always put a couple of artifacts on top of that. It allows me to splash my Imperial Oaths. It allows me to play 4 colors reliably. And, even if I play like those pile controlish deck, I always find a space to put a containment construct because I think, at worst, it's a 2-1 blocker that will chump something and will preserve my life. If I draw it later and I have a Network Terminal on board, I can use it as a personal holding mine, basically.
Yeah, that is one of the busted combos that we've seen in the format. The containment construct combos so well with Network Terminal as well as Modern Age, right? Like these are kind of the 2 cards that you see it paired with the most where you're just like, wow, I am just getting beaten here. Next is Shrine Steward. That's the 5 mana 3/2 when it ETBs. You can search the library for an aura or shrine and put it in your hand, then shuffle.
Yeah, again, this is like something I like to wheel or maybe just close to the wheel to pick it, especially if I have like a shrine or 2, especially if I have the black aura that kills a creature. That's definitely very good with it. And there are a couple of other minor uses for it. Grafted Growth you can get with it as well.
I've realized something Luis and I talked about it on the show. I kind of brought it up as a theory. I just think the shrines are just a trap. Like, I just don't think any of them are really very good. And Shrine Steward for me is much more about searching up cards, like you said, like Twisted Embrace, like removal spells or things like that, rather than like, I'm going to make the shrine deck work. Like, I've never lost to the shrine deck ever. Like, the issue is that they're creatures, right? So like, if the shrine thing's ever going to happen, it's like, what does it have? 2 toughness? Literally all my removal spells kill it? Sure. Like, I'll just use it on that, you know?
I mean, and it's true. I won't play every shrine. Like, I won't play the red shrine that doesn't do anything. Even in the dedicated red deck, it's not performing that particularly well. Green one is a bit of a risky strategy because you build high and then one removal just wrecks all your effort. But I do like the white one, and I would play this one definitely because the white one is something that leaves something on board, so you're not completely wasted when it gets to removal. You end up with this 1/1 or maybe 2/1s or 3/1s, which stabilize you quite well. And in some decks, I actually do like the blue one for self-mill. Like if you have multiple seasons, when you can get cards back from your graveyard, if you have some kind of crazy loops with the Turtle and Weaver of Harmony or Turtle and Seasons, you might want to self-mill on occasions.
Okay.
And it's also like 0-4 is a good blocker as well. So
it is. It's also a ninja enabler when it needs to be. But the interesting thing to me is, because I agree with everything you just said, which means that I view the shrines on an individual basis. Just like, can I, like, does this fit what I'm doing? And, you know,
I mean, I think that I agree with your overall statement of shrines are a trap.
Yes.
But yes, they are fine cards individually. In fact, if you took the shrine text off, you'd still play most of these.
Definitely. And that's really what I meant was that like the shrine deck, like people are going for 3 or 4 colors to get that 4th shrine in there or whatever. That's the deck I don't lose to.
Well, we have Sierkovitz. Is the shrine deck a trap?
I actually didn't check the data on the number of shrines in the deck and the results, but that's a very good suggestion, and I will definitely do it for my next seminar.
You must have missed the email that we sent with all our questions well in advance.
Yeah, that was like a good week and a half ago that we got that to you, Sierko. I don't understand. We definitely didn't blindside you with 4 hastily come up with questions right before the show. We wouldn't do that.
You never did it. I mean,
meanwhile, Sierko's computer's literally still working on one of the questions that we asked.
It's not. It finished it.
Oh, yay! You were right. It did finish before we were done with the intro. All right. Well, Shrine Steward's a card that you can definitely put in your deck if you have a few viable targets. The other thing I like for a card like Shrine Steward is if I have 2 different types of targets, I find that that's really good. Like 1 shrine, 1 removal spell or something, so that it kind of fills whichever, like if you're stable or ahead, you can go get your other shrine. If you're behind, you can go get your removal spell. I like that about it. Next card is one that I never see and have never played. It's Dramatist Puppet. That's the 4-mana 2/4 that bumps up a counter on something when it ETBs. I haven't found a use for this one.
Or removes.
Yeah, I haven't done that either.
I mean, by the way, just on the Shrine Steward, it's also good with like Kami of Terrible Secrets and Naomi and all the things that need both types of artifact and enchantment because it finds both. So
look at him; he's like, it's great with Network Terminal.
Oh yeah, because you play the Shrine Steward, you get a bad shrine or aura, and then use the Network Terminal to tap in the Shrine Steward to then discard. There we go.
Maybe you just load your deck on Kami Warpaints and you have enchantments to loot because you get them with Shrine Steward. You can copy them with Kiki-Jiki. But yeah, Dramatist
this is
Puppet,
why Luis is a Hall of Famer, man. I mean, look at that. He just gets it. He sees all the angles. But Dramatist Puppet's just unplayable, right?
I know some people that do like it.
Do you respect them?
Yeah, we need names.
Yeah.
Can I say that I disrespect them now?
Yeah,
no. Of course.
Yeah, I would say if you like Dramatist Puppet, I'm like.
So, I think that this brings a bit more wide topic in terms of data. Like I know that data shows that the card is bad, but if someone can make the card work, it means that they probably play it in a very different way than any one of us. So I sort of respect that they tried to figure it out and make it work for themselves. I didn't find a way of making it work, and I don't play it. That's the point.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I also respect that approach, but also I feel like I get to free roll off of it because if people find something that actually works, you'll see it. Like somebody will play it against you, or, you know, you'll find it yourself or whatever. And if they're willing to put in the work on taking losses by putting Dramatist Puppet in their deck so that I don't have to, I'm down. Like, that works for me.
Dramatist Puppet crawled so you can walk or whatever.
Yeah, standing on the shoulder or whatever. All right, next card.
You can put a second Death Touch counter on your Kappa-Tech Wrecker. I don't know.
I like that. As long as I have a Kappa-Tech Wrecker, I'm happy. Experimental Synthesizer is next. This is one card that really stood out super early in the format. Where are we at on it now?
It's still great. It's just not the first pick, in my opinion, as well. This is the card that I exactly want to see, like, pick 6 in my first pack, so I know that I have a sufficiently clear way in red, and then jump on it, and I never did it. And I continuously see people streaming and drafting, and they see, like, pick 10, Experimental Synthesizer, pick 11. If I don't first pick it, I will never see it again, and that's not the strategy for drafting mono red, so...
Inkrise Infiltrator. This is the 1 in a black 1/2 flyer that you can pump for 3 in a black. Kind of an interesting one. You know, it doesn't have a ton of synergies in the format. You can pick it up with a ninja, and as it has flying and is relatively difficult to block. So that's kind of the conceit. But, you know, this thing sees a little bit of play, right? Like, you'll see it sometimes.
Yeah, so I think that one thing about the flyers in this format is that there is not much resilience against flyers. I mean, yes, you get your Bamboo Grove Archers and maybe the Boseju, but Boseju is a whole kind of worms of other problems if it's against you. So if you put like 3-4 flyers on the board, you can actually win the game quite easily. And those infiltrators are working their job. I very often found myself when I play those like slow controlling decks, I can deal with 2 flyers, but the third one might get me because I'm already at a lower life and my Oath tokens cannot block flyers, which is probably their only drawback, really. So I found the card pretty annoying against me. I never made it like super good for me. Then definitely I wouldn't first pick it. But it's like, yeah, again, it's a card that I wouldn't be ashamed of playing, especially when I have ninjas.
Okay. Next is an interesting one that Luis and I have talked about quite a bit. It's Sky Swimmer Koi, the 3 in a blue 3/3 flyer that has a bonus, lets you loot when artifacts ETB.
It's the modern age at home.
What do you think about the Sky Swimmer Koi?
I mean, that's exactly what I think about it. It's modern age at home. It just costs 2 mana more, and then maybe it will loot once or maybe even twice, and it's one power more than the modern age creature. So I'm not super high on it. It can be annoying, again, if you don't have good ways of dealing with flyers. But it's not something that I'm going to go like, wow, a 4-mana 3/3 flyer with some slight upside. It's fine filler. I would put it in my decks, but I wouldn't prioritize it.
Sign of the times. Bearer of Memory is next. 2 and a green for the 3/2, and you can pay 5 and a green to put a counter on something. +1/+1 counter on a creature, and it gets trample until end of turn.
This is, again, it's the same situation. I think that the card is fine, but it doesn't blow my mind. The 3/2 is not really aggressive stat line. I don't want to be aggressive in those decks anyway, but in 6 mana to give a +1/+1 counter and trample can be useful in some games, like especially when you have those gigantic creatures without trample, like Boseju, that can be quite useful.
Yes.
And if you need some enchantment synergies, it's also fine, but it's nothing I will prioritize.
Last common is Ancestral Katana. This is the 1 and a white equipment that gives your creature +2/+1, equips for 3, and you can get a cheaper equip cost if you attack with a samurai or warrior alone. It reduces it to 1. Card's not been very good.
No, I mean, the best part of this card is that you will get one in your draft. You don't need to prioritize it at all. It will like be there in the last picks. I've had games when opponents were playing like red-white and they had played a bunch of Imperial Oaths again and then 3 katanas, and they were just putting 3 katanas on one thing, attacking me. If I didn't manage to kill it, they put it on another one, and it was cute. Super annoying.
I think that says more about Oath than it does about Katana.
Yeah, exactly.
I had high hopes for this card. It looked powerful, but it has been pretty much crap.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's actually the worst white common, according to 17Lands, and it's also well below the threshold. Its game in hand win rate is 50.3%. But as we like to remind people, The baseline is not 50% on 17 lands. It's closer to what, 54?
56 even 56? In this format, I think.
Yeah, it's higher. So this card's bad. Like, this is about as bad as they get. It also does say something, by the way, about how cards are designed that, you know, even the worst cards are still like they do things, right? Like, this isn't a card that doesn't have text that's not relevant to the board. It's just inefficient, right? It just doesn't fit the format particularly well. So, all right, quick snapshot. Those are our commons. What a stinker of a pack. Where would you be right now, Sierko? Are you taking your network terminal? You infiltrating?
I mean, I'll be between synthesizer and network terminal, depending on which path I will take. Do I take all 4 colors except for red, or do I only take red? These are basically the 2 paths I can pick from those commons here.
What do you think, Luis? If you had these commons for your choice?
I'd probably take the synthesizer. I do like that card.
Yeah.
I found it to be a really important part of a lot of the more successful red decks.
Okay. Let's get into the uncommons. Wow. Heavy hitter right off the back. Life of Toshiro Umezawa. This is a good one. The one in a black that gives you the what's it called? The Jitte activation for the first 2 and then turns into a 2/3 that somehow taps for mana for spells. Man, this card's been such a house. There's a lot of 1 toughness creatures around it. Sometimes it even kills 2 of them.
Yeah, I mean, look at this floor on that card. That's gain 4 life and you get a 2/3. Like, in a controlling deck, this is such a beating already.
Yeah.
And if you manage to kill 1 creature and only gain 2 life, oh my god, it's so much better. If you manage to kill 2 creatures, you feel like, I just basically won this game. And it also ramps you into your oaths, which is something that you probably should not ignore.
Definitely.
I mean, there's no question that I would pick this one at this stage. That it's first pickable. It's probably rarely second pickable. You would have to have a really stacked pack to pick something over it.
Well, let me see what I can do for you here. The next card out is Gravelighter. That's a 2 and a black 2/2 flyer. And it's kind of interesting. When it ETBs, you draw a card if a creature died this turn. But if a creature didn't die this turn, then each player sacrifices a creature. Card's been pretty good, actually. I thought it would be a little difficult to set up, but it hasn't been. I feel like people, and it also leaves a 2/2 flyer, right? So it's not just a spell effect on it too.
Yeah, I do like that card. I always play it. I probably wouldn't first pick it, and definitely I wouldn't first pick it in the pack with the Life of Toshiro. But I wouldn't probably. I can imagine packs I would just first pick it. I mean, if you manage to draw a card of it, it's just like what was the 2/1 elemental that drew a card? That was a busted card in the M20, was it?
Yes.
And this one can have this dual utility. I think that the only trap that you have is when you have exile-based removal and you play it, and then you play this one, and then you all of a sudden have to sacrifice something. A friend of mine, definitely not me, did that, and then had to sacrifice their flyer for nothing, basically.
Oh no, that's terrible.
I'm glad it wasn't you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whew.
Yeah. Good
that
friend
would be
of yours.
Embarrassing, wouldn't it?
Acquisition Octopus is next. This card I really liked when I first saw it. Just a cool card, cool design, kind of medium as far as performance goes. This is a 2 and a blue 2/2 when it ETB or when it hits the opponent. You draw a card, but you can reconfigure it for 2 to give that creature that same ability. Really cool card, but power level wise, perhaps not super high.
Yeah, for me, this card has a special meaning because, believe it or not, it's the first card in the alphabet in the whole set, which means I see this column very much when I analyze the data because they are sorted alphabetically. So I do know its stats quite well just because I have to always check everything based on Acquisition Octopus. And it's just middling in terms of the numbers it provides. And it's especially, you don't want to play definitely more than one of those. It really drops off once you have multiples.
Okay, so I told you I could give you a run for your money on the Life of Toshiro Umezawa. How about Blossom Prancer? 3GG, 4/4, reach, and when it ETBs, look at the top 5. You can reveal a creature or enchantment from among them, put it in your hand, and if you don't, you can gain 4 life. This card's sweet.
So do you think that the design team put the double green cost in it because it's a GG?
So that you could just get the game over with? I mean, this is a rare quality card.
yeah. And still, I would have a head scratcher with the Life of Toshiro. I mean, I know that Blossom Prancer is a better card, but Life of Toshiro is a cheaper card, and you want those cheap interaction to survive to the late game when you can play your Prancers. But it would be such a difficult choice for me. I think I would end up in the Blossom Prancer in the end.
Super close, by the way. There's a grouping of 3 cards at the top of the list that are all within 0.5% of each other before the next one drops down a little bit more than that. And that is Blossom Prancer number 1, Kappa-Tech Wrecker, and then Life of Toshiro Umezawa. So we have 2 of the best 3 uncommons in the set here in this pack. And I can even spice the pot up just a little bit more for you here, Sierko. You said if you opened a really sweet red rare, you might take a flyer on it. How about Thundering Raiju? 2 red, 3/3 haste. And when it attacks, it puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. Then it deals damage equal to X, where X is the number of modified creatures you control to your opponent. That thing hits really hard too, but you would have to really commit to red to make it work. And you've got 2 really great options. So how would you approach that?
So, I mean, let's look at the win rates. And Raiju has around 60.7% win rate.
60.6 right now. I just checked it.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, sorry. My memory has the data from yesterday, possibly.
Wow, you missed it by a 10th. And by the way, for comparison,
Blossom Prancer 63.9, so 3 percentage points higher win rate than Raiju. That doesn't mean Raiju is bad. Raiju is very good. It's just that this is the testimony of how good Blossom Prancer is. Like, you have to keep in mind, 67% was things like Comma from Kaldheim, the super bomb of the format, and the Luminarch Aspirant, I think, had like 67 as well in its format. So, I mean, we're talking these cards have a win rate of top bombs from other formats, maybe slightly lower than that. Mm-hmm. However, if I could have the guarantee that I'm going to wield that synthesizer, I would be tempted to pick the Raiju, because Raiju itself wouldn't sway me. But when I look at this pack, I know that I'm going to pick Blossom Prancer, and I'm not going to wield probably anything useful from that pack. Mm-hmm. But if I can take Raiju and the synthesizer, I would be maybe more happy.
Also, what you're describing is red being open, not even just that you're getting 2 cards out of the same pack.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would take Blossom Prancer because, in my experience, there's a lot more directions to go when you start with a Blossom Prancer than when you start with a Raiju. And the cards are certainly comparable in terms of quality. Like, obviously, Blossom Prancer has a slightly higher win rate. And I think partially that is because you're less likely to train wreck. There's more different green decks you can draft. Multicolored
and
green
other
decks.
cards will carry it.
Yeah,
also.
exactly.
I mean, it's you're more likely to play Blossom Prancer in your Imperial Oath deck than playing Thundering Raiju in the same deck. So,
well, what about Life of Toshiro Umezawa up against Prancer? They have effectively the same win rate.
Yeah,
they're a rounding error or whatever off, but one of them only costs 2 mana and only has 1 colored mana symbol in it. Wouldn't you prefer to go for that, given that you're more likely to be able to cast it game in and game out if it has a similar win rate?
So there is something to be said that Life of Toshiro Umezawa has a much more unique effect. Mm-hmm. But I've also had recently, I don't know, I think is it maybe the sign of maturing format, but I've had 2 Life of Toshiro Umezawa deck recently, and they were not performing very well because people sort of learned to play around them a bit better. At least I knew that the opponent had like those 1 toughness creatures, but they were not playing them out too early. They were maybe waiting because it was like Spirited Companion. You can still play it when you know that you're playing against a Durly deck, which you can see in my case because I play like a dual land. Like they know this Durly. You don't have to play those Spirited Companions on turn 2 because you have time. You can play it on turn 4, and then I'm stuck with the Life of Toshiro. I'll just play it for 2 life and lower the value slightly. While in the beginning of the format, you just basically so easily sniped 2 creatures from it that was atrocious.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. There's also something to be said for Blossom Prancer, just like assuming that you have the ability to cast it, which is a safe assumption, that it's just amazing in all scenarios. Where Life of Toshiro Umezawa does have weaknesses, right? Against the small creature decks, of which there are many, you may be able to get some card advantage and get something going, up to a 3-for-1, if you run hot. But Blossom Prancer is a 2-for-1 almost every single time. And if you count the 4 life as a card, which you shouldn't, but if you did, then it is every single time. But even then, it's 5 cards and you're in green. You know, a lot of your creatures are also enchantments on top of it. So you're very likely to hit. I mean, that's just raw power every single time, right? And I don't know. There's got to be something to be said for it.
Reach is also life-saving.
Huge. The reach is the difference.
So many times the reach just saved my life so many times when I played this card, just basically because I stopped every sky attack from happening forever.
And that's something that I've always valued a lot. You know, when we start to get up into the A+ range for like a bomb rare, right, is how likely am I to survive the turn that I cast this? Right. And like top tier ones are cards like Grave Titan, right? Where you get a 6/6 and 2/2/2s. They can all block right away. It's very, very, very difficult to die on the ground the turn after you cast a Grave Titan. If you cast a Frost Titan, right, it's really difficult to die that next turn unless your opponent's gone super wide, because you can tap down whatever their best evasive threat is and still have a 6/6 blocker. But when it comes to the top tier stuff, right, that means that you realistically aren't going to die the turn after you cast it. I think of cards like Hornet Queen, right, where you end up with 5 death touching flying blockers, right, where like there is just no realistic scenario in Limited where you're going to die the next turn unless somebody has something that's unblockable, or they're going to burn you out, you know, where creatures weren't going to matter anyway. And Blossom Prancers, you know, further down the line towards those cards than any we normally see. And that's because of reach, and then also the life gain aspect of it. If you're on life support, your opponent has 5 creatures, you have 1 or 2, you play this, you gain the 4 life, and now you have a 4/4 reach blocker. It's very difficult for your opponent to kill you without killing the Prancer right then. I would take it for sure. That would be my pick.
Yeah, but it is closer than you might think. And also, like, people, I think, that's maybe a note that I don't have data on it, but I think people use the life gain mode on the Blossom Prancer a bit too rarely. It's a good mode, gaining 4 life.
Yeah, part of all of this is I think a lot of the Umezawa's win rate is baked into sniping 1/1s, and Blossom Prancer's win rate is casting the card. Yes. So like I think that actually makes it so that less, especially as you're talking about Sierkovitz, if people are playing around the best case scenario for one of these cards, you can't play around Blossom Prancer's best case scenario. It just exists when you get to 5 mana.
Yeah. All right. So we're all taking Blossom Prancer. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. We made somebody on the left very happy. If they happen to take a red card, they're just thrilled. And even if they didn't, they can pick up Life of Chishiro Umezawa and be pretty happy with that as well. Okay, let's start talking. Actually, I've got a Patreon question of the week, and it's for you, Sirko. The person who asked the question actually specifically asked you. Sasha says, "Hey guys, in episode 627, Sierkovitz mentioned that games in hand win rates skews towards higher mana value cards. Is this because you're more likely to draw any given card in a longer game, and therefore cards that do better in longer games, like the high mana value ones, tend to perform better?"
It's complicated in general, but
yeah, that's why we're asking you.
Because there's 2 things that act in opposite directions here. So first of all, if you have expensive cards, you probably already want to make your game last longer, because especially in best of 1, with smoothing, you don't get so easily to 6 mana. So if you want to play something that costs 6 mana, you want to probably aim at prolonging the game as much as possible. I actually did this analysis for this format, where I basically looked at 2 metrics. So I looked at the game length of cards, and I looked at the game length of the games that you win when you draw a particular card, and the game length of the games you lose when you draw a particular card. Okay. And there is the idea that, cards that shorten the game when you win are finishers, bombs, and like super aggressive creatures. Mm-hmm. And cards that make the games go longer are sweepers and the control cards that will basically stop opponent from attacking, stabilize the board and things like that. And basically I managed to add it up for decks, and I could figure out which decks want to do what. So basically, like black-red is a super aggressive, and most cards in good black-red decks are trying to make the game shorter. Blue-green decks want to go long, and the best blue-green decks are trying to make the game go longer, basically.
Okay.
But if you have those cards that want to make the games go longer, that are expensive, you will very likely draw them only in the games that go pretty long, because you draw more cards in those games. But in the games when you are overwhelmed very quickly because you draw your top end and the opponent goes 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop removal dead, you're much less likely to draw that card. So it will slightly skew the win rate towards those longer games, because you will still have probably 56% win rate with these cards, because that's the average for the 17-land users. But the ones that you lose are going to be rapid, and the ones that you win are going to be very long, which means you're more likely to draw that card. Yeah, so that's the bias that there is. But there's more other things that happen there, and that would probably require a whole look into it in much more detail than I think this episode provides. But I hope that it gives at least an impression to Sasha. Was it Sasha?
It was Sasha, yeah.
Good.
Okay, good. So let's talk about some bigger picture stuff with the format and what you're seeing in the data. First thing, Luis, you had a question about 3-color decks, I think?
Yeah, it actually came because I was talking about IPA draft and how the mana is not great there. And Andrew Cuneo, who, I always love his perspective on things. He's like, I don't know if the mana is actually bet worse in IPA than Neon Dynasty. I bet 3-color decks in IPA win more than 3-color decks in Neon Dynasty, which I think that his point of the mana, the IPA's mana is not as bad as people say, is fine. I don't think that's necessarily the right comparison, because IPA is all 3-color decks. Like, you basically always draft 3 colors. But what that did lead me to go to Sierkovitz for is what are the win rates for 3-color decks or 2-color decks with splashes? How much lower are those? Because Cuneo is saying he thinks they're lower than 2-color decks by a noticeable margin, or at least that's what he's implying. So I'm curious if that kind of bears fruit.
So yeah, I don't remember which 3-color combinations had the best win rates when I played IPA, because that was, when IPA was released. So some time has passed from that.
Wow, you are old.
Yeah, I am. My youthful looks might deceive you, but I am older than you. I did my first day 2 GP 3-0 draft in IPA, so I do remember the format.
I was joking because all of us are old, but you actually did play a Grand Prix before I did. I wasn't playing competitively when IPA was out, so that's funny.
Yeah, no, I'm a proper. I don't even want to call myself Magic Boomer. I think we're Magic Silent Generation,
Wow.
Before Boomers. Before that grind fest of the middle Magic, when all the accruing value things happened, I'm raised on, play Carnophage and attack. Play your Mog Fanatic and Curse Scroll and don't care if you run out of steam, you're just dead. Fine. But so there is a cost of playing 3-color decks. But it's very difficult to say that 3-color decks are worse than 2-color decks in this format, because you will have a mixture. You will have people like me that just basically purposefully draft 3-color decks. But you will also have decks that sort of train wrecked, and you don't make it on good playables in 2 colors. So in the pack 3, you pivot to try to get the 3rd color, and you start scraping, and this will lower the win rate of those multicolor decks by some amount. But 2-color decks, like Pure, with only 2 colors, they have a 56.7% win rate. 2 colors and a splash have 54.2. So there is a 2% drop. 3-color decks have 51.8. If you look at 3 colors, and this is 17Lands data, so 3-color decks means you have more than 3 cards of each of those 3 colors and multiple sources for them. So they are like heavy into. And then weirdly the 5-color decks, so like 3 colors and 2 splashes, have again 54.5. So I think that because you don't accidentally end up in a 5-color deck, you would probably accidentally end up in a 2 colors plus splash. There might be this kind of an effect there, and I think that a large chunk of 5-color decks will also have the Kami War, which is a pretty good card if you can make it work.
Yeah.
Long.
should we be correcting automatically, Sierkovitz, for the you say if it has 54% win percent, should we be minusing 5 from that?
So to normalize it to 50%, I would.
Yeah. Like,
are
those actually slightly below par performers then?
They are below par for the 17Lands users. Yes, they are below par for 17Lands users. Slightly below par.
Because I think it's hard. You shouldn't
take away 5% points. You should take away maybe, they are 2 percentage points below par. Let's call them like that.
Okay, so not
much.
Mm-hmm. But if we were to not filter for 17Lands users, let's say that you guys I know slightly off topic, but I think it's really important to conceptualize the data that we're getting. If you could get data for everybody, like let's say you had access to data for all players on there, 50% would be the bar, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to make some type of correction for the fact that the players are there. So when you say 54, we should actually be going, ugh.
Well, I think what is a lot of what you do is comparison, so you don't really need to do any adjustments, right? When you compare 57 versus 56, the fact that they're all 5% lower or 4% lower relatively, but yes, when you look at it in a vacuum, what does 54% mean? Well, it means this is probably not a great strategy for 17Lands users.
Right, because if I told you that go ahead, Sirko.
Especially that it's good players that do it. But I do know that there are some people that individually have a very high win rates with multicolor decks because they are better in assembling them.
Yeah.
So
or they're just a very good player and this is what they're choosing to do. Like, I think that's also part of it. Like, if you look at someone like Sam Black, I think he's very good at drafting these formats. He goes very deep. He might have a high win rate with whatever he plays, even if there are better strategies than what he's using currently. I'm not saying there are. I'm just saying, like, sometimes good players can pull decks up more than the decks pull, your natural win rate down.
By being good at gameplay and deck building and the other stuff. Yeah.
Right.
So I always say that Sam Black could probably win a draft by shuffling together 40 slices of cheddar, but I think
no. You got to have 2 slices of bread, at least 2.
Yeah, 2
to put on either side of all the cheddar.
Again, this is why Luis is a Hall of Famer, right?
Is that the famous?
I mean, it's funny because we're talking about base win rates and adjustments. My Pro Tour testing team always does this too, because we always love looking at our data, right? Because we get actual good samples of. Like, when we have 16 or 17 people playing a deck, which we do these days, like that's a good amount of matches, right? 7 times 17 matches, you end up with like 100 and some matches. And when we win 52% with a deck, we don't think that's good because our base win rates individually average out to 58%. So that means we're winning less than our historical win rate. But you also have to look at like what every other deck did and what everyone else did. But it is interesting trying to figure out like what and why are you using these numbers? That's always the question you have to ask yourself when you use any numbers, really.
Right. And we're on a podcast. And so when we say, hey, we looked at, Sirko's like, hey, I looked into it, 54%, we should be somewhat mentally correcting for that being not very good.
Yeah, no, in my head, it's so obvious that the 17Lands user win rate is above average, but you're absolutely right. But coming back to the Sam Black example, I still think that he will be penalized slightly less by playing a multicolor deck compared to his baseline win rate on the 2-color deck. Because I think that you can build the multicolor decks more consistently, and some people are still learning it, and it's absolutely fine. But with learning comes losses, and that's also absolutely fine, because in the end, people will learn and they will get better in it. And I think that before New Capenna comes in, maybe it's worth to dabble with multicolor decks and try to figure out how they operate differently, prioritize mana. I know that I did statistics on splashing, not in this format, but in the previous one. And there was such a striking result in terms of how bad are decks that splash a couple of cards on 3 basic of that type compared to the decks that splash using only 1 basic of the type that you're splashing and providing the other sources from multicolor things, so like dual lands and maybe some fixers, artifacts, or creatures that give any color of mana. It was a massive difference. And so basically, if you're splashing one color, you really want to work very hard on having only one basic of that color, and the rest you want to provide it with some other ways.
You know what's funny is you saying that makes that less true.
Why?
And the reason is the people who do this also indicate it's all just selection effect, where the people who know that the best way to splash isn't off three basics are already good. I'm not saying it's not good advice. It is, in fact, very good advice. But it's funny that the more people who do this, I'd actually expect those win rates to go down, because you're giving tools to people who, I mean, this is how you learn. This is how you get better. So I think it's awesome. But it is funny that you're already looking at people who show understanding in building mana bases, which probably means they're slightly better at playing the games, at, drafting the other cards that go around it. It all compounds. It's the best example of this in the history of Magic for me for drafts has been Ghoul-Caller's Bell back in Invasion or in Innistrad. If your opponent plays turn one Ghoul-Caller's Bell, they're either quite bad or quite good. There's very rarely any other explanation.
Yeah, totally. So can Luis go back with Cuneo and say I was right, or can he say you were right to Cuneo?
I still don't know what are the win rates of the IPA 3-color
Come on,
decks.
get on these numbers.
I would expect win rates of IPA 3-color decks to be 50% because every deck is 3 colors. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess the bottom line is, if you can draft a streamlined 2-color deck, it's probably better for you than to draft a dirty deck. But of course, you can do the most efficient things. But why? If you can draft 4-color madness with bunch of random cards hold together with a piece of string, like I like to do in this format.
Yeah, you got to have fun in there too. That's that part is not captured in the data quite as much. But that's really interesting big picture view, because one of the things that I really like this data, the data that comes out, is we get to challenge our old assumptions, right? And sometimes those challenges are overturned, right? Where we learn that groups of cards, like say cheaper cards like 1-mana cards or things like that, actually perform better than we would anticipate, and we can adjust our picks and our approaches accordingly. But then also sometimes the data backs up things that we kind of always assumed were true. And I think that's useful too, right? Just to go, okay, well, we can actually start to quantify it. If Luis and I are on the show saying, look, you shouldn't splash unless A, it's worth it, like the cards that you're going for actually shore up, either give you a huge power bump or shore up weaknesses that are really important for your deck, and B, that you actually can support the splash without having to just raw dog 3 or 4 basics or whatever. We can say that sort of intuitively, but if you can come back and say, no, the data definitely backs up that if you're just like raw splashing off of 3 basics like that, it's going to screw up your mana enough that you're going to see losses more than wins for doing so. That's one of those things that you really can't. It's so hard to capture that on any given game, right? Like the only time that really comes up in a visceral way for a human or whatever is to say, oh, wow, I've drawn all 3 of my planes that I'm splashing with, and now I can't cast my other spells. And you go, okay, this is definitely costing me. But on a game in and game out basis, the hardest cards to see that aren't performing for you are the ones that you don't cast, right? Like people just hold a card in their hand for the whole game, can't cast it, and then go, well, I lost because my opponent cast a bomb. And it's like, no, you lost because you couldn't cast your spell, right? And it's just so difficult to see that, especially for players that are newer to the game or learning limited and still becoming more accommodated to it. It's very difficult to see that because you just take whatever is left in your hand and shuffle it in, because all of your attention's on the board. All of your attention's on what actually beat me, what did I actually lose to. But it's really hard to see the negative side where you didn't cast a spell, or, one of the other ones is a lot of people will play cards in their deck that don't really do anything like in combat or whatever, and they'll play too many of them. and they don't really notice that like they had 3 equipment laying on the battlefield and no creatures because they didn't balance out their deck. And that's actually what lost them the game. They'll say, you know, like, oh, my opponent killed me with their rare. But when you look down at the battlefield, it's like, well, no, you didn't have enough creatures in your deck to support this much equipment. That's ultimately what killed you. It's just hard to see that if you're not looking for it, but the data can really show that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. I think that actually when you touch the topic of equipment, I think that the Eater of Virtue, the rare equipment that can gain keywords of particular card. Well, this card, for example, is way overplayed because I think that people just automatically put it in their deck because it's colorless. Mm-hmm. And in some of my decks, I just like completely don't care for it. I had it in my sealed pools and I didn't put it in because I think, look, my deck is going to struggle for survival for the first 6 turns. Mm-hmm. Then I take over and then I kill them in 2 turns and I don't care that I have a +2 attacker on that stage. So I don't need that card because it doesn't do much. And I mean, in some decks, even though they're controlling, I might want to play it because I have the couple of the 2-3 lifelinkers, and then I might want to use it because it would be great on my creatures to give them extra lifelink. But in lots of the decks, I just wouldn't want to use it, but people will just play it randomly and then lower their win rate because they have a card that's just completely off plan.
Yeah, you know, that's funny. Go ahead.
In terms of the splashing and not being able to play cards, I think that best way to visualize, and that's how I visualized it in my head when I was learning those things, is that if you can't play a card and it rots in your hand, it's just basically like taking a mulligan, and mulligans are bad and no one likes a mulligan. Yeah. And there you're sitting there with that mulligan card that you can't do anything with, and then you die.
And that's a good visceral comparison, right? Because people know that mulligans feel bad emotionally. Like you're like, oh crap, I got a mulligan. It's like, well, that's what you're doing. You're just waiting for the entire game, you know, by holding it in your hand. And you know, so bringing that reaction out. Touching on something, maybe we could get you to, I don't know if there's anything that interesting to be found data-wise, but conceptually, definitely interesting is the point that you just made about Eater of Virtue, which is, you know, I kind of call it like the Ornithopter or the Memnite test, right? Which is like, what if I just made this card free, right? Like, because a lot of times the bar that we're trying to reach is efficiency, right? It's like, well, that card's not good because it costs too much, right? It's like, it's because I don't want to pay 3 mana for that. But if you made it 2 mana, it would be one of the better cards, or 1 mana, it would be one of the best cards, or whatever. But there are cards, especially for certain archetypes, that you could actually make 0, right? Like free, everything free about it, and you would still turn it down. And this is what happened with Memnite, and Ornithopter wasn't so much. I guess it has been in a few more modern draft formats, but it never does well because it has such low impact on the game that it's not actually, the bar isn't the casting cost for once, where it usually is. But there are cards that just don't impact either your plan or the game in general enough so that even if they were for free, you wouldn't play them.
Well, I think with Eater of Virtue, it's actually not that going on because it costs 1. So the cost, it's already so low that it kind of effectively is free. I think with Eater of Virtue, what's going on is it's a good card. Mm-hmm. Now, it's context dependent, but people, I think, mostly slot cards into good and bad card buckets. And Eater of Virtue is a good card. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of decks it's very strong in. There's some decks it's not good in, but people don't usually dive much deeper than good or bad card. I include good cards in my deck, and Eater of Virtue is a card that I think most people would pretty loath to cut as a result. Like, I'd have a hard time cutting it. I mean, I would if I think I'd be able to identify when I should, but it's a kind of card that if you get it early enough, it probably behooves you to try to draft the deck that it is good in because there are decks where it's reasonably strong.
Well, so it's interesting because I think it's actually both of those things, because I also think people look at it and go like, it's cheap, like it's so cheap and so colorless that I'm just going to throw it in my deck because why not? You know, and I think it's in conjunction with what you said, where it's generally considered a good card, which it is. I mean, you know, particularly in certain plans, it can give it more you know, abilities. And then also, you know, if you have companions or any just sort of, you know, beetles or any of those like cheap, just ETB cards that have power and toughness, then it goes up a lot, right? Because you can turn those into like real creatures, etc.
I think that it's a weird card that if it was a common or even an uncommon, people would think a bit more critically about whether to put it in their deck or not. But because it's a rare, they just like go with the heuristic, well, rare must be good.
That's probably the most important.
The counterfactual I have for that is Bone Splitter and Mirrodin, which is effectively the same card in most games. You know, Eater Virtue's obviously a little better. No one ever cut a Bone Splitter from their deck either, even in decks where you should. Like,
well, yeah, but you had bloody Frogmites there.
Well, what I mean is, like, in Mirrodin, you could draft these like red-green ramp decks that had mostly 3 and 4 and 5 drops. Bone Splitter wasn't actually good in those decks, but like,
oh yeah, that's true.
No one ever cut a Bone Splitter from their deck. That just wasn't like what people did.
But there you had the novelty of the equipment as well. I mean, it was an exciting mechanic. You want to test it.
Yeah, but this is interesting because you've just brought up two more like we're talking about, oh, it's cheap, why not? It's a good card. It's considered a good card. Why not? You also threw in probably one of the bigger psychological motivators, which is that it's a rare, you know, and then if you go back to Bone Splitter, you had the novelty. There's a lot of reasons why people put cards in their decks, and sometimes those reasons don't hold up under scrutiny, as we've seen here.
But you see, this is the kind of problems that I have to deal with every single analysis of data, because I have to figure out at least 7 hypotheses why something can happen and eliminate biases from every analysis. That's why it's so painful. And that's why when you're not very careful, you can come up to conclusions that are opposite to what's happening in reality because you didn't figure out that one assumption, one caveat. And I've been wrong many times. And then I put something on Twitter, and then a person comes to me and did you consider this? And I'm like, damn it. No. Back to the drawing board. Let's redo it. I'm glad that they do it, you know, because I want to have a good analysis, but it's a bit embarrassing when you didn't come up with one particular fringe case of something might have been happening.
Of course. Yeah. But then you learn for the next one. Let's talk about the balance between artifacts and enchantments in this set. You know, there is an archetype, the black-white archetype specifically, but there's multiple cards that will award you for having both an artifact and an enchantment on the battlefield. How does that work out for this set?
I think it works out reasonably well. I think that in most cases, if you want to do the thing, you can do the thing. And there is a couple of caveats in there to analyze, but I didn't analyze every single card that has this mechanic. I looked at the numbers of the Cameo of Terrible Secrets because hopefully you will like that comparison. This is basically a better Saros Packmate when it works.
Ooh.
You know. I mean,
give me that point of toughness.
It doesn't have the Foretell. Foretell was very important in Saros Packmate. I'm not ignoring that fact. But, you know, for 4 mana, you get to have a 3/4 that draws a card and you gain 1 life. That's great. Now, if it works.
Yeah.
And it's good to think about this card from this perspective, because I think, at least initially, I underestimated it. That, another 3/4 for 4 mana. These cards are just bad. But then when I started thinking about the ability is busted. I mean, drawing a card and the 1 extra life is just super good. So I looked at the numbers of the card based on the lowest number of the limiting factor that you have. So if you have 12 enchantments and 1 artifact, the limiting factor is the 1 artifact that you need to draw. If you have 7 artifacts and 3 enchantments, the 3 enchantments is the limiting factor. So I didn't look at which type is limiting, or both are at the same level. I just looked at what is the lowest one. And it's basically like Cameo of Terrible Secrets is terrible when you only have like 1 as the limiting factor. Then it gets like 50.6% win rate, so -5, it's bad. Yep. It becomes like bad-ish when you have 2 to 3. And then it has the 54% win rate, which is -3, so 47% if you normalize it to 50. And it becomes okay when you have 4/5. That's basically when it has the average win rate of 17Lands users. Now, we go over 5 and it becomes an actively good card. So it goes to 58% at 6, 59% at 7, and 61% when you have 9 as the limiting factor. But that means, of course, that your deck has 9 artifacts, 9 enchantments, which it will not happen very frequently. But it can happen. And then to 61% win rate, that's up there with the best commons of the set.
Okay,
so that's pretty close to just the win rate if it just a 4-mana 3/4 draw card, gain a life.
Basically, yeah. That's probably how you should look at it. So you can play it, I think, when you have 6. And again, here we have come to a couple of caveats. And there is artifacts and there's artifacts. Like if you play a Cameo of Terrible Secrets reliant strategy, there is a difference if you have a virus beetle on battlefield that can die from if someone coughs a bit too strongly. And if you have something like the Ecologists, my favorite card name, Ecologists Terrarium, me being an ecologist as a profession, I do like the idea of me having a terrarium. Because this card you choose when you sacrifice it, and I find it the same. It's pretty good with Network Terminal as the artifact that you need to tap for the ability, because you are sort of in power of when it's sacrificed or when not. No one is going to prioritize killing your Ecologist Terrarium once it hit the battlefield, because majority of the value of the card is already accrued by you getting the land. So it's much easier to defend this kind of thing than to defend a 1/1 creature. So you might think that some artifacts are more valuable for the Cameo of Terrible Secrets because they will sit in the battlefield until you decide that they shouldn't sit there.
Okay. And it's the same reason why we talk about how, like 7-mana or vehicle is not really something you should count too heavily.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the exact same thing.
Yeah, that is very similar. Even if it sort of reverses the orders. That's exactly in the same way. So you can definitely play Cameo of Terrible Secrets. I think the card is very good, but you have to at least make sure that either you have this limiting type threshold of 6, I would say, or your decks go very long. Because if your decks go very long, you can sometimes play it without value, but you can sometimes keep it a bit longer to draw into your both types.
Okay, but it's in the 5 or 6 range that is sort of the basement for it being
good. That's probably when you're quite safe that it will be okay.
Okay, and that again is, that's the limiting one. So if you've got 5 artifacts, you need to have at least 5 enchantments or more, and same reversed, if you're going to be happy playing the combo. Look, I mean, we all have decks that go off the rails and you can put it in your deck and it's not a disaster, but that's where you're starting to be like, okay, I got myself a good card here.
Yeah, like most of the time it will be artifacts that are limiting, because getting 5 enchantments is not a difficult thing in this format. When you want to play Cameo of Terrible Secrets, you probably will have them, because you either have white, which has a bunch of enchantments, or green, which has a bunch of enchantments. You should be fine with that.
Okay, that's really interesting. Another common that I have to ask you about, because it's been a bit of an anomaly and it's kind of a revelation. Talked about it already a little bit. In fact, Sierko, you've mentioned it a bunch of times. Imperial Oath. This card it baffles me that this card has the game in hand win rate that it does. Of all of the commons in the set, it currently is second. It's 0.2% behind Okiba Reckoner Raid, which is another card that I kind of want to fold into this discussion. But I was shocked that Imperial Oath had such a high rating, even early. It was marked as one of the best commons on 17Lands early. Who was it that you said, Luis, kind of pegged it? Somebody on Twitter?
Jason ILTG.
Yeah.
Very skilled drafter, and writes lots of threads about it. He also very good at Storybook Brawl. He's just like one of those like all around gamers. And he like day -1 or whatever was like, I think Imperial Oath is awesome, in the running for best common or something along those lines.
Right. And, and so I have to bring this up because yes, to me, it's clearly a very strong card, right? I don't think it's hard to make an argument for why the card's good. We talked about cards that help stabilize your board. Heck, I made reference of Grave Titan, right? A mythic rare from 10 years ago that was one of the best, limited cards you could get, ever. I mean, it's in the top 50 or 30 or something ever. And this card's like not that far away from it in the way that it affects the board the turn that you cast it. It even has some upside over it with, you know, a huge scry late in the game can really propel you. So, you know, and it stabilizes you. It's hard to die the turn after you cast it, etc. So it's clear that it's a very strong card, but it's 6 mana. And you just don't see 6 mana cards reach the top of the list when it comes especially to commons. I just did a quick check, just to kind of running my finger down the screen type check. So in order to get to a 6 mana common in Vow, so the last set, it was number 23. The 23rd best common was Flourishing Hunter. In mid, there wasn't one. Like I went through the whole thing and there wasn't one that was above average. In AFR, it was number 19, and that was Gorgeous George, our guy, which, by the way, interesting to note, is Flourishing Hunter and Gorgeous George are both similar cards and cards that help stabilize you in similar ways to Imperial Oath, so that's something to keep in mind. And then I went even back to Strixhaven, and not super surprising, it was a little higher, number 12, but it wasn't a creature. It was a removal spell. It was Rise of the Extus or whatever, you know, which kind of like a 2-for-1 removal spell. So, you know, when I look at these, the highest we got was 12 out of the sets going back, you know, a year basically. And this somehow has been number 1 for the stretch and is now currently number 2. How in the world is a 6-drop that high up when everything around it cost 1, 2, or maybe 3 mana?
I think that, by the way, I mean to mention there were 2 of them because there's always 2 of them, the Master and the Apprentice. I'm not going to say which one is SAA, the other limited grinder who was together with Jason. They were both like preaching the gospel of Imperial Oath. I know because I was involved in some things that they were involved in. I was, to put it mildly, skeptical, and I had to eat my humble pie after that because the card is just awesome, and they were so right all through the previous season. Okay, so, and like first of all, Oath is awesome. We know that. Oath is also awesome in multiples, which is something even stranger for a card that costs 6 mana. So just to give you the numbers for Oath, it's like if you have 1 Imperial Oath in your deck, the win rate is around 55%. If you have 2, 58%. If you have 3, that's 61%.
What?
If you have 4, 62%. And if you have 5, it goes to something like 66%.
It scales from 1 to 5?
Yep.
Just to be clear, you would assume that for a 6 mana spell, it would tail off pretty quickly after like 1 or 2, right?
Nope. No, it doesn't.
I'm saying you would normally assume that, right?
Yeah, exactly. No. It surprised me too when I did it. Because I did this analysis of which cards are better in multiples, and I'm like looking at the list of the things that the computer spat out, and I'm like, what?
Wait
Imperial
a minute.
Oath?
So wait, another way to conceptualize this would be to say, if I came up to you and said, what's the optimal number of blanks to have in a deck? And at some point, every card outside of a few select ones will go up, 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 and then they'll fall off, right?
Yeah.
Like a 7-drop would fall off quickly. A 1-drop might even as well.
Fade into Antiquity is a great example. Fade into Antiquity goes quite stable until 3 copies, and then there's a big drop off when you put 4 copies.
Okay.
You can imagine why that happens. It will rarely be relevant to destroy that many artifacts, enchantments. So you see that with this card. But with Imperial Oath, there is no saturation of that effect.
When you have 5 Imperial Oaths, if you live and cast 1, you're just going to cast 3 more over the next 3 turns.
Yeah, exactly, because you will always cast Oath till the end of
to.
the game. Yeah.
Right, but you would think that would punish you at some point when you look at your opening hand and you have 2 6-drops in it that you might not survive to, right?
If I have 5 Imperial Oaths in my deck, you can better believe in building the rest of the deck with that in mind, you know?
True.
That's...
there are some things you can do.
Sierkovitz,
and, you know...
Is 5 the optimal number, or do you think that you just ran out of runway? I mean, is it 8?
I think so. It's very difficult to say because we don't know. First of all, 5 Imperial Oath in the deck, it doesn't have like a massive sample size. So you have like 5 5,500 games with 3 oaths in the deck, and then you have around 100 with 5 oaths. So you have to treat it slightly slightly relaxed. There's 1,000 games with 4 of them. So there's a big drop off. Like few people played 5 because, I have to admit, honestly, in my last 5 drafts, I had a total of 12 oaths, and I think I cut 1.
Okay. I was going to say, how many people hit 5 oaths on this podcast?
I think it's mainly Jason. I'm pretty sure that out of those games that had 5 oaths, Jameson from week 1 is quite a large chunk of that sample size.
Okay.
But it's true that what Lewis says is that if I build a deck with multiple oaths, I build the deck around it. So I put my network terminals even in the mono deck. I put my what's the name? I put my samurais to get my extra lands. Like, I think one of the very, very important reasons why Bosiju Reaches Skyward is such a great card in this format is in best of 1, it gets you to 6 mana automatically almost.
Guaranteed. Because
you cast it for 4, you get those 2 lands, and it's not so easy to get those 2 extra lands because smoothing will remove those land-heavy hands from your hand. Because you basically, with hand smoothing, how it works with 17 lands, you will only get 2, 3, or 4 lands in your opening hand. It will be really like 1 every 200 games you get a 1-lander, and 1 every 200 games you get a 5-lander.
Interesting.
So 99% of the hands will have 2, 3, or 4. I think that I looked at the data, and out of 500,000 opening hands, there were 3 0-land hands.
Oh my God. That almost sounds like a bug, like something that they didn't anticipate rather than feature. Built in. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a feature. It basically will happen like once every 100,000 hands that you have a no-lander in smoothing, in best of 1. So, but this comes with the problem that you will rarely get those 5-land hands in the opening, which means that you will have a bigger problem getting to 6 lands. So you need to design your deck a bit and make sure that you will get those 6 lands. And like Samurai is a perfect card because it allows you to splash Oath into any deck because you can play 1 Plains, 2 Samurai, and you're done. The splash is good enough for 1 Oath. If you have a network terminal, you can play 2, 3 Oaths easily from that because you will get there. You will get that 1 plane.
That is just crazy.
So that's one thing. Second, it stabilizes. Third, it turns the corner because that Scry 3 is... Lewis, I don't know. How many times did you say that Scry 3 is way better than Scry 1 on this podcast? Can we count it in already triple digits?
Yeah, the other part of this, I've said it many times, the other part is on turn 6 when you presumably need no more lands, scrying gets a lot closer to drawing a card when you put a land on the bottom.
Yeah, and scrying 3 is basically, I counted in my head like Oath is 6 mana, 6/6 over 3 bodies that draws 1.5 cards.
Is that fair, Luis?
That's how it works.
I think that's fair.
Because Scry 3 at that point in the game is better than draw a card, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And if you have multiple Oaths, it's so often that you're going to chain Oath into Oath, and you not only turn the corner, but you present a realistic clock very, very quickly. And if not, again, with Network Terminal, I had plenty of situations when I had Network Terminal Containment Construct, when I could just build the next turn when I put a land on top, even though I didn't need it, and then milled the land, drew a card that I could play, played the card, and expanded my base for no cost whatsoever. You can do lots of shenanigans with the planning of how you draw things there, and it's a very powerful ability. So, the card is just like, when you think about it, like I'm sure Jason and NCAA did before format, unlike me, it makes sense that this card is really busted, and especially that the mid-range has a lot of good tools in black and green, and this one card is solving many of the problems those decks has. So, for example, like control decks and good mid-range decks, they will often have a problem that they need a finisher, and it's usually something of high rarity.
Mm-hmm.
And here, it's not. You just get a common that basically acts like a decent rare.
Yes.
And this is a powerful ability because you can go into those mid-range decks, because even if you don't get the Juke and Defense the Temple, you might get 2 oaths, and that will be probably enough for your deck to be decent.
Wow. To me, the difference then ends up being the scry. Like let's compare these two cards. Flourishing Hunter, 4GG, 6/6. When it enters the battlefield, gain life equal to the greatest toughness among other creatures you control. Let's just say you gain 4 life, right? Let's just amend this card to 6/6 ETBs, you gain 4 life. And then we compare that to 5 and a white, you get 3 samurais. And that's it. You just get 3 samurais, right? Somewhat similar cards, but one of them now tacks on Scry 3, right? What if we put Scry 3 on Flourishing Hunter? In other words, a card that, yes, costs 6, but stabilizes you and then sets you up. That is a game changer, right? Like that Scry 3 is what propels you into the late game, means that you have such a better chance to find whatever you need. I mean, remembering as well that Scry 3 at the point that you cast it, I mean, what percentage of your deck can you see? If you put all 3 on the bottom and you get to the 4th by next turn, you've looked at 4 cards there, right? And by the time if you cast this naturally on turn 6, right, you're already 13 cards into your 40 card deck, perhaps even a couple fewer in there. I mean, you're looking at quite a big percentage of your remaining library there, more than 10% of it, just to try to dig for whatever you need, if it's removal spell or another threat or whatever.
For me, I think that I do prefer gain 4 life on a 6/6, and I do prefer Scry 3 on 3 2/2s, because the problem of the 6/6 is that you play the 6/6, you stabilize unless they have a removal, in which case you don't stabilize anything. And then those 4 life give you the sort of insurance against dying the next turn. The thing that we were talking in the beginning, how likely am I to survive to the next turn? With that 4 life, I'm probably quite likely, even if they kill my 6/6. But with the 3 2/2s, very unlikely that they manage to kill all 3 of them. So I'd rather Scry, because they are my insurance to survive to the next turn. And the next card is my insurance that I will continue putting pressure on them and stabilizing.
Right. Yeah. To me, that's the difference, but it's also still incredible that Imperial Oath, like here, I'm going to read you the cards, the best commons in the set, and we'll just real quick, and we'll go through the mana costs for them. So number 1 is Okiba Reckoner Rate, so that's 1 mana. Then Oath is 6, sort of out of nowhere. Spirited Companion, 2. Virus Beetle, 2. Moon Circuit Hackett, at most 2, but often 1. Modern Age, 2. Suit Up at 3. That's kind of your expensive one. Twisted Embrace is the other exception that's anything above 3 out of these first 10 or 12 cards I'm going to read. Network Disruptor, 1. Moon Snare Specialist, 4, but often 3. Tameo Safekeeping, 1. Clawing Torment, 1. Mukatai Ambusher is again technically 4, but it's usually 2 mana. Master's Rebuke, 2. Searchlight Companion, 3. And then we finally hit our next card that costs 4 or above legitimately, like all the time, which is Tales of Master Sashiro. And then it's right back to Fang of Shigeki, 1 mana, and then we get to your boy, the Kami of Terrible Secrets. But I mean, out of these first, 18 or whatever we named, of cards that you actually game in and game out pay 4 or more mana for, there were 3. And the most expensive one is at the top of the list. I don't think we're going to see this again unless they push a common this hard, because this is just such an anomaly. You just don't see this happen.
But it's also like, it's also that Oath is so much better than any other 6-drop and even 5-drop in this format. And at the same time, it was very available for a lot of time, that it sort of dominated this 6-drop slot in all the decks. Because why would you draft an inferior card when you can get the Oath, which means that you will play those inferior cards only in some weird circumstances when you actually didn't get to play the Oath. Right. And it's also, as has been said multiple times, it's a colorless card practically. Like, first of all, it's 83.3% colorless, because the 5 mana is colorless in it. But also, it's so easy to get to this one white. It's just like literally Samurai, 1 Tapland, 1 network terminal. It's like super easy to be able to play it in any color of the deck. So you don't consider even that it has kind of like color limitations. So it will dominate the 6-drop slot in all decks that are physically possible, because you can put it just anywhere if you need it.
Luis, I have a game design question for you. Given what you know now, would you change it? Like, would you make it 4 white, for example, make it more samurai white card specific where people can't splash it? And what rarity would this card be if I read it to you in a vacuum? If I just said, here's a card, 5 and a white, here's the stats, you tell me the rarity, what rarity you would guess it to be.
First of all, I'd say it's more likely to be uncommon than common.
Okay.
Certainly among Magic sets as a whole, because a lot of in older sets this would be a rare, but even just now, you're like, hey, this is in the next set, what rare do you think it is? I think it's more likely to be uncommon than common based on the amount of material it makes. Whether you want it to be double white, I tend to think no still. I think that it's cool to have an expensive card among all the cheap cards. Like you're saying, knowing what I know now, where 1-mana commons are among the best commons with Reckoner Raid and Network Disruptor and whatnot. I think having a 6-mana card be really good is nice, and I don't mind the whole splash thing, especially with a lot of ways to kind of splash it, and leads to I think fairly good games overall.
Yeah, the interesting thing to me is that it's so samurai specific, and I wonder, like, I think we've all noticed that the red-white samurais and warriors deck hasn't really come around, right? Like, yeah, there's certain versions you can put together, but that's not a deck you'll see that often. It hasn't really hit, right? Like, if you had to pick one of the archetypes that missed and didn't really quite gel, that would be one of the ones on my list. And part of me wonders if they're like, okay, well, we're going to push this common really hard for that deck, yet it's just Sierkovitz playing it alongside his, flourishing hunters or whatever every time. Everybody's playing it in green and splashing for it, and that deck never gets their hands on it. I wonder if it was supposed to be for that, and if that deck would have actually performed more on par with the other decks if it had access to this really powerful 6-drop that was more skewed just for it by being double white.
But, if you look at the data, except for the win rate, if you look at the ALSA, so ALSA is the how late you will see that particular card. For Imperial Oath, you see it averages a 6th pick, which means that you will have access to it when you draft it, even in white-red. I think that white-red missed for multiple other reasons, not necessarily for the reason of Oath. And I think Oath is one of the reasons. It's like they have the signpost mechanic that wants you to attack with 1 creature, and they make the most powerful common in the color make 3 creatures of which 1 can attack. It's sort of like there's this balance between wanting to go wide and wanting to attack with 1 creature in those.
It is a very strange fit for that style, for sure.
Yeah, even if you made this double white, I don't think it makes those decks that much better, because like what you just said, it kind of doesn't play nicely with the mechanic they purport to be about.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a.
I in general am in favor of not putting too many double color cards at common. I think that Magic's mana system is part of the appeal of the game. It's part of why the game, I think, is so successful. But Limited has bad mana to begin with. Again, we're mostly on 9/8. And the average Limited deck in modern Limited formats is closer to 9/8 than anything else, I would bet. And that means that you're still going to have a lot of games decided when you just don't draw a swamp and you draw 3 islands. I think double color cards are something you should use somewhat sparingly. If you look at older sets, they got double color commons all over the place, and it just that's just not, I think, where you want to be.
And for no reason, even.
Yeah, not even because of power level or making them feel better or worse or whatever. It's just, I don't know. You can't really.
I have to say that double color pip looks cool on some cards. So that's
it is a nice visual. Yeah. Okay.
I do like it on the black removal, because black removal, I think it's good to protect it for black drafters, because if they lose the removal, they lose everything that the color has to offer most of the time.
Yeah, their creatures are usually less good. Luis, I know you have a meeting coming up, so if you have to jump off, that's okay.
Gladly.
Wow.
And meeting with IPA.
I just have one more question for Sierkovitz before we wrap up. So I want to make sure that we have time to talk about it there. But if you have to jump off, Luis, great job as always.
Always a pleasure, Sierkovitz. And maybe next time we'll get all the questions in if you're like a little less long-winded. So, all right, see ya.
Jeez. A little hit and run there from Luis Scott-Vargas.
He said next time, so I guess I passed the test again.
You did. Congrats. Yeah. Okay, so one more question for you, Sierkovitz, before we call it a show here. Talking about how the trends and data change over the course of a set, how they evolve, how they start off one way. You've had enough sets now where, you've been diving into the 17Lands data, looking at more specifics, but also at broad strokes trends. What do you see? Is it constant evolution? Does it settle in at some point? How does it look?
So, yeah, I did an episode on evolution of my own seminar that I do weekly.
That's on your stream?
Yeah, that's on my stream. Now it's also as a podcast, which I don't recommend because obviously it should be seen. But if someone likes listening to it, you can listen to it as a podcast. Marshall, I listen to your advice on content creation. If people want something, give it to them.
Yes, that's very good. I like that.
You
that's
don't
good.
know better than what they want than
That's right.
they do themselves. So that's fine. I mean, you can still listen to it and then watch briefly the vid just to see the slides or whatever. I put it on YouTube as well.
No, that's cool. And by the way, we'll make sure to have links to Sierkovitz's stream and to the podcast and everything. So if you want to catch up with this stuff,
that's even easier.
You have a what?
The link tree and everything is in there.
Oh, you're a real content creator now. A link tree.
Yeah, no, very professional. I wouldn't call it because profession includes salaries. But I mean, I do something, I want to do it seriously. So yeah. I listen to good advice because it makes other people's life easy more than it does anything for me.
Fair.
I did the episode on looking at the evolution of the format because I was curious myself. How does it change over time? And I saw that weirdly, the format, even in best of one, solidifies quite quickly. So the first 2 weeks, people are changing evaluation of cards. You see those cards that people missed the most. And actually, every format, I make a competition for people that follow me on Twitter. You can guess which common will be discovered most in the first 2 weeks of the format. So basically,
that's cool.
Which common will be picked more highly on week 2 than it was in the first days of the format. And this time around, Imperial Oath was the most improved one, and it still goes criminally late, which is weird. And then also Fade into Antiquity was the second one that improved the most. And what it means is that you see them roughly 2 picks earlier at latest now than you did in the beginning.
That's a lot, right?
Yeah, it's quite a lot when you think about it. It's like the difference is that you see half an oath less per draft, maybe 0.7 oaths on average fewer per draft, which accrues. Like if it happens to a couple of cards, this makes a difference between seeing like 27 playables in a draft and seeing 22 playables.
Huge
if you
difference.
see 27 playables, you probably will make your deck, but if you see 22, you don't have that guarantee.
Right.
So I actually calculate how many playables you will see on average per draft for different archetypes over time as well, and sometimes publish those numbers. And you can see that some decks are good because they're vastly open, like the black-blue deck in Midnight Hunt. It was so good, and Lewis could force it so much in the first weeks because you got average like 50 cards. You saw 50 good cards for that deck in an average pod.
Crazy.
When people got onto it, you saw something more like 27, and then you can't force it because you will have pods where forcing it will end up in a complete disaster. But for the first week, you could definitely just close your eyes and you get enough.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. So you said it takes about 2 weeks?
2 weeks, yeah. Then it stabilizes. And I think that this is important. Like the first 2 weeks, if you want to learn the format, I think first 2 weeks is the discovery phase when we don't know exactly which cards combine very well with each other. And you can figure out those things that were overlooked in set reviews. I use it for learning. I know that some people use it for forcing the most powerful deck because they want to win. I actually want to try to, because I know that the cards are a bit more open, so I can try weird things and usually get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
I know that my win rate suffers a bit, but I think that my win rate gets better in the second part of the format because I try to discover those things. And then in week 2, you know more or less that the pick orders are going to be stable. So then you might want to start solving the format, because you'll know that if I see the card right now as an average of 5, it will do so for the next 8 weeks. So you have this kind of like solid baseline when you can plan your actions and you can see what is more open. You can sort of align your drafting preferences with what is more open. Because, who cares if I love drafting mono red if I never see the mono red open in my seats? So
Right.
I cannot like really plan to do it. But if I see that I can reliably draft something, I can put it as my preference and sort of position myself. I still want to draft what's open, but if blue red is terrible, why would I draft it even if it's open? I mean, I'm still going to end up with a bad deck, just an open one. So you want to have some preferences while drafting, and looking at the data and what goes how late can at least inform you where your preferences can be realistic, and then you can figure out your plans and your way of drafting, and that's how you gain an edge in the later format. So I think that you get like 2 weeks of stabilization and discovery, then 2 weeks of sort of people thinking that they know everything, and I think that that's the moment when you should solve the format, and then you have this late stage when things stay roughly stable and you can actually abuse it the most.
And then it's tweaking. It's smaller.
Yeah, it's like you discover those little tastes, the little pocket of synergy here and there, and it's a lovely phase because it's everyone gets better. So if you manage to stay ahead of the curve, that's a real skill in late format.
Right, because the whole rest of the curve is coming up behind you.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're a little bit ahead. Well,
and
that's great.
This is the evolutionary biology hypothesis from it's called Red Queen hypothesis, and it comes straight from Alice Through the Looking Glass. So the second part of Alice in Wonderland. Mm-hmm. And Alice talks to the Red Queen, which is the chess queen, about why do we have to run so fast, but we're not moving. And the Red Queen says that sometimes you have to run as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. And I think that this is the late format playing of draft formats. Everyone tries to get better. And even though you have to move continuously to keep your win rate at the same level as you had in the first weeks of the format.
Oh, it's a great way to view that. It's hard to sense that until you start falling behind, even though you feel like you're still doing the same thing. And it's funny because a lot of times the reason that you're falling behind is because you're doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You're like, but I didn't change anything. It's like, exactly. You have to keep up.
It's this little things like what we were talking about, the life of Toshiro Mizawa, that you play it, but you don't see the targets as often, and the card becomes slightly worse. So you maybe have to reevaluate it and maybe boost that Blossom Prancer higher in your pick order than the Life of Toshiro. While in the week 1, I will definitely slam the Life of Toshiro because the card was just so busted.
Yes, and it really did feel that way, that you were just getting away with something every time you cast it because people had multiple targets every time. Well, that's great stuff. Really interesting to see how these things evolve over time and how we have to adapt to them. It definitely lends credence to keeping up on it, right? Like checking in with the podcast, checking out 17Lands, and kind of just seeing what the trends are. Because, if you want to be one of the better limited players, specifically on Arena, or especially on Arena, you are going to need to keep up with what's going on. You can't just settle on a format permanently. But if you are going to take the temperature, wait a couple of weeks, let things settle, and you'll have a pretty good idea for how things settle down, and then you can kind of attack that as you see fit. Let's call it a show here, Sierkovitz. Great stuff as always. Super fun to have you on. It's always fascinating to dive in and challenge our assumptions, and also get some real data behind the things that we think about and talk about all the time on the show. And we always love having you on. Where can people find you? What have you been up to as far as your content creation? You just mentioned the your specific streams that you do in addition to making them available as a podcast. Let everybody know where they can find that stuff and tell us what you do on them.
So I'm in the living room. currently sitting on my bench. No, just kidding. Like, okay, I mean, I do the content. I do it for, I don't know, vanity reasons or boredom, or I just want to communicate. It's probably a combination of all those three factors. But I'm a secondary tool here. I think that what you should do is you should, first of all, use 17Lands. Second of all, support 17Lands. Third of all, as a side project that I'm not like linked with my Sierkovitz brand. Can we call it a brand?
Sure. Yeah.
I started recording videos for 17Lands YouTube, which I highly recommend you to subscribe to so you can get the updates. And they will slowly be trickling, and they are aimed at the beginner user of 17Lands, which is something that I think there's a wide appeal. And we're recording basically short videos to explain what features of 17Lands are there, what are the traps, what are the possibilities, how can you use them, and things like that. So we started with one video, but I promise I'm going to make a couple of more. So and put this in the 17Lands so that the guys can have some more traffic.
Awesome. That's a big news.
More like, like 101 tutorials for the 17Lands users. So
are these evergreen topics, or are they specific to the set that's out at the time?
No. These are. I'm starting at least. It's called 17Lands 101.
Okay.
And it's basically the first episode is on how to read the table. So basically, what is ALSA? What is ATA? What is GPWR? What is games in hand win rate? And how to read what are the traps of those statistics? What are the opportunities and what you have to be careful of? So it's not long. It's like 20 minutes. So it's not like even a full podcast. And I will try to make them even shorter, maybe, and maybe even more basic without going too much in detail, so that any person with no data background or no limited background can sort of see them and hopefully, at least learn something.
That's really cool. Yeah. So we'll get a link to that for sure. And then, like you said, I'll make sure there's a link for 17Lands in general in the show notes as well. People can check out the data themselves. They can sign up to get their own data, which gives you access to a whole nother suite of information, but it's specific to you, which is really cool too.
Yeah. And I mean, I do run my seminars weekly, but these are not aimed at complete beginners in data. I mean, I try not to make them prohibitive, because I think that it's a silly idea to make things prohibitive just for the sake of prohibitiveness. But there will be some more tricky analysis there sometimes.
Okay.
So they are aimed at someone that at least feels comfortable with data, doesn't have to have a data background, but wants to learn something. And there I'm doing more experimental stuff. So I'm sometimes I'll just because those analyses take a lot of time. So sometimes I'll plan that I'm going to look at the game length, and I come with the data and I don't find anything interesting. So I make like a 40 minutes seminar about why is it important to also communicate data where you don't find anything interesting, because if you don't, then you don't know it. And it's weird.
Yeah, that's just working with what you got for the day, right? It happens. Yeah, sometimes.
No, I mean, sometimes I get a metric and I find that it works partially, but not fully, and I will just communicate what I found there and what can it inform us. So it's more like a very experimental approach to data, where failure is definitely an option and happened multiple times.
Oh, that's really cool. Well, we'll make sure I'll put your Twitter link in here too for people that want to follow you on the show, or from the show here. And I want to say thanks again for coming on. It's always great to have you.
It's always great to be a guest. Thank you for the Limmy, by the way. I didn't.
Oh yeah.
Didn't receive a physical copy. But,
Luis will send you the trophy.
They don't exist.
just keep bothering Luis for the gold-plated trophy.
Oh yeah, no, definitely, and write it at Cedric Phillips, because he's providing stuff for Luis now.
Yeah, there you go.
No, but I mean, you don't know how good I felt for the next week after I heard that episode. I really felt amazing. So thank you for that.
Well, you deserved it, buddy. Make no doubt about it. So that's going to do it for this episode of the show. If you want to find me on social media, Marshall_LR, and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. As I mentioned before, you can find Sierkovitz's information as well as 17Lands links in the show notes here, so that you can follow up and check out the YouTube channel for 17Lands, as well as the seminars that Sierkovitz does, or you can even just say hi to him on Twitter. I want to thank our sponsors, channelfireball.com and FTX, for supporting the show. And that's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week. Sierko, we're supposed to do a sign-off. Luis had to go to his meeting. He left us with that one. What should we talk about?
I made did you see my Twitter thread about the arena economy? Did I have some suggestions for arena economy?
I did see that. Why don't you go over that? Yeah, that's great.
I mean, I could go through a couple of those points and briefly talk about them.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like so many of our listeners are like, what do you mean the economy? Like, I know how much a draft costs. Who cares? But everybody's so mad about, wild cards or whatever. I have like 1,000 of them.
Yeah, I just calculated. I have $1,200 in wild cards currently stashed in
at the $50 whatever rate. That's
if I
insane.
count the rare ones. If I count the mythic ones, that's probably more like 4,000. But
wow.
What do I use them for? Nothing. I have everything.
Me too. Okay, so what were your heavy hitter points about the economy or suggestions?
So should I start it like from that would be edited basically, no?
No, you can do it however you want.
So for the sign-off, I wanted to talk a bit about the economy of Arena, and there has been an announcement about it, and lots of people were cross about it, and I think that they have a very good point on that, especially when they play constructed. I think that how much it costs to make a deck is quite prohibitive. And, I have a lot of friends from my LGS that play Arena very casually. And we tried to organize our FNM online during the COVID. And for them, a lot of the formats were too prohibitive. They couldn't play standards. They forget about historic. So we actually came up with our own format. We played Artisan Set Roulette constructed. So we basically randomly selected 3 sets, and we played uncommons on as the highest rarity.
That's pretty cool.
Card, and you had to craft the deck yourself. So sort of between limited and constructed. And, I really feel for our constructed friends, because they are our friends. They just play different format, because I can imagine how rough it is for them. So I came up with several suggestions on improving arena economy, and take them or leave them. Some of them are actually contradictory. So they are suggestions. They are not a coherent plan on how to do it. So how the economy works right now, it looks to me that it focuses on accruing large value from a small group of people. The problem with that kind of system that is based on whales is that it's very restrictive towards the growth of community, because it's hard to enter. Like, once you have all the cards, it's very easy to continue, and they can fleece you quite skillfully, and it will get a lot of money. But the problem is, without increasing the player base, it's difficult to keep that, because in the end, even whales get angry, and 5, 6, 7 of them leave the game, and you don't replace them with new people because they just don't have any kind of motivation to start playing the game. Mm-hmm. So I think that at least one thing that Wizards could consider is a cheaper economy designed to boost player volume, and then you attract people because you want to broaden the player base, because when you have a broad player base, you have a healthy game. So you avoid this problem of being too reliant on whales. And because you will have a broader player base, you can actually make money on tournaments, sort of like open PTQs and things like that, when you can charge money for participation in those tournaments rather than for the cards themselves, because they would not be restricted, cards would not be restricted. So I don't think that many people would complain if you would have a PTQ that would cost $10 to participate in, while a lot of people would complain when you want to sell wildcards for $50. Mm-hmm. And I thought about like an example of PTQ structure is that you have 24 hours of open queues, and it's sort of once the queue fills, the tournament starts, and you have, something dividable by 2. So like 512 people per PTQ, and you can have like 2 qualifications from that and single LM. So like, huge risk, huge reward kind of tournament.
Yeah, sure.
And you get qualified for the Pro Tour, which would be also online, so you're not restricted to the number of seats. You can have a fixed value for top 128 players in the Pro Tour, but you can have 600 people participating easily. It doesn't cost you that much. So I think that the problem of the last years of Magic was that there was no robust tournament structure and no linear path for promotion. Like, if I wanted to play the Pro Tour, I didn't know how to get there.
Right.
Because it was complicated. There was like Rivals, MPL, something. And I think that the simple thing like small tournaments, PTQs, GPs, Pro Tours was a very intuitive thing. I really hope that Huey will fix it in the next couple of weeks. But I think it would help. I think that the pro scene should be there because there is something aspirational about the pro scene. But we don't need things like MPL when they get paid annual salary. We just need them like, in golf, top 100 is invited for the big tournaments. Mm-hmm. And if the pros would be aspiring to be invited into those big tournaments that they can play from their bedroom now because it's on Arena, that would be enough. If you had like a path that, one day I can become this pro, that's pretty inspirational and gets people to play, and rather than discourages them and move them to a casual format. Mm-hmm. I think that there should be a ladder based on ELO ranking that is transparent. Right now, we don't know how it works, and you know that you have the mythic number 1. But I think it would be quite straightforward to basically reuse the old DCI ranking when you had the competition level that weighted and then opponents ranking, and you played against the opponent, you knew their ranking, you knew how much you can gain, you how much you can lose. So I think this also can solve the problem of being paired with someone. You're mythic, you're playing with someone gold. You can sort of like, if you're playing against a mythic player, it's like playing in a pro tour. If you're playing against a bronze player, it's like playing in the FNM, and there were different weighings for how much ranking you can gain.
Right.
So you're not getting punished or rewarded for grinding on bronze players, and it makes matchmaking quite quick. There should be awards for being in top 100 in the ladder. I'm not talking like a lot, but if you would have this PTQ structure that costs $10, maybe the top 100 ladder players would get a free PTQ entry, and that's something to fight for. It's not too much, but you get something. And I really think that this is my best idea there. I would introduce something called Brewer's Heaven event. So for the first 2 weeks, you could have you could pay X gems, and you have access to all the cards in Standard for the 2 weeks. There is a separate ladder and a sort of separate format, which is basically Standard, but you have to play at least 12 cards from the new set in all your decks.
Okay.
So you have access to them. You need to put at least 12 cards from the new set, so you need to brew with the new cards. And for those 2 weeks, you get the ladder, and then you get the same rewards as you would get from a normal ladder. After 2 weeks, the event ends, and people can test all the cards from the new format. They can build the decks, and they could actually get bonuses from being a good brewer. And the last thing, I think that if they have competition, they should have a deck rental service where you can just pay extra entry fee and you can build any deck you want, and you play it only for that tournament. It's phantom, and then you can just it disappears.
And you pay a small amount for that.
Yeah, like pay in cash, like maybe half of the entry extra.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that would solve a lot of the problems, because one of the feel bads that people have is that they build up these big collections and then they just can't do anything with them. It's like if you don't play with those cards, or if you want to change those cards out, you just feel stuck. It's a one-way street where, you certainly can't sell your cards. There's no investment feeling where you're like getting invested into the game like you would if you bought a modern deck, where now you're like, all right, I'm a few $100 in, maybe $1,000 into this deck. I'm invested in this and I can change the deck out, but it would take some work for me. But, I can take the resource I have and turn it into something else. That just being completely non-existent, I think is kind of a feel bad, because it just feels like the only thing you're doing is spending and it's never going back the other direction. And if you're just like, well, okay, I'll pay a little bit, right? Like a rental fee. Then I get to play the deck I want. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff after. And then it just goes back and what you were getting exactly. But, you were more specific about getting it for just a short period of time. That has a much different feel than saying, no, you have to buy the entire deck and then you just have to keep it forever and you can't ever get anything for it. That has a much different vibe. So I like it. That's good stuff.
Just before I finish, one last thing is that I do realize that I don't have the inside knowledge of how Arena operates and financial numbers. And there are people that sit there and, they know much more than me. I don't want to sound like, this guy that comes from the outside and willy-nilly proposes the solutions and they're genius because I didn't take like 50 million things into consideration. I just thought that I'd rather focus on at least suggesting some constructive solutions rather than complaining about things all the time. So,
I like that.
I don't want them to be like, take it or leave it. You know better if they are realistic or not. It's just I'd rather suggest something than wine.
Good stuff.
Especially that I'm a limited player and I'm stuck with cards.